Hi, welcome everyone who are here in person and those who are virtual. I'm Tracy Gershwin. I'm a professor at the University of Northern Colorado. We're here in Denver, so I'm an hour, like a little over an hour and a half northeast. So that's where University of Northern Colorado is. For those who are not familiar with our university, this is an important background because a lot of what I'm going to talk about today has to do with preparing teachers. It has to do with educating, supporting, encouraging, mentoring teachers. And so at University of Northern Colorado, we have a really large teacher preparation program. We have preparation for special educators at the undergraduate and the master's level, for the generalist in special education, which in our Colorado licensure is basically all students with disabilities, with the exception of the other programs we have are deaf and hard of hearing, vision and blindness, gifted and talented, early childhood. We also have an autism certificate. So we have a lot of teachers who come into our school, our lab, right? And so at the undergraduate, master's, and doctoral level. And so I've been at UNC for about 18 years now. And my background is as a special education teacher, first and foremost. I identify as a special educator, but I also am a behavior analyst. Sometimes I let people know I'm a board certified behavior analyst. Sometimes I don't, because there's a lot of connotations that comes with that. But I'm more of a school focused board certified behavior analyst, which is very different than what we see in a lot of schools. But it's important to share with you why I'm saying that I'm a behavior analyst. So my research and my passion has always been partnering with families. So I was a special education teacher, and then I was a behavior analyst. I continue to be, but for a number of years, my role was working with families in the homes, in the grocery stores, on the buses, in all of the places where it needed to be. It was a partnership. It wasn't a training. It was me coaching, working with, collaborating, learning from the families that I worked with and supporting their children, students. My youngest client was 4. And then obviously family looked different for my oldest client who was in her 80s. But through it all, I've always learned that there's so much there. You have to have families and educators working together if you really want to have good outcomes for students. And so that's always been my sort of soapbox. And my colleague, Kathleen Kaiser, unfortunately is not here with us today. But she is from Texas Christian University. There's a group of us who are all researchers and professors in the area of family professional partnership. And we've all done a number of work across the country, really trying to emphasize the importance of educating our teachers on how to partner with families. Because most teacher licensure programs do not include classes that are about partnering with families. They're not about partnering with educators. They're not about partnering with administrators or problem solving. Sometimes that happens too, right? But really, we've done a lot of research. Kathleen and a group of us, we reached out to a number of professionals who work at pre-service programs across the country. And we identified individuals who have a specialization in family professional partnerships. And we interviewed them and surveyed them separately. And we asked them, are you teaching your teachers? Are you in your pre-service programs? Are you addressing family professional partnership? Are you talking about how to do that? Are you giving them the strategies on how to build the partnership, maintain the partnership, and repair the partnership if needed? And the results are pretty sad. I mean, the positive side is most of the respondents and our participants said, yeah, it's absolutely vital that we educate teachers to work with families. There's no question about it. It's a really important skill set they're going to need to do a good job. However, we don't do a good job doing it in our pre-service program. We don't really have classes devoted to it. A lot of times what people say is it's sort of, they'll say where it's embedded. And I worry, I appreciate the part of embedded, but I think we all know what happens sometimes to embedded. And here's where the behavior analyst comes in about me. And my passion is family professional partnerships. And one of the things that a behavior analyst knows and does is we're very specific about how we describe the behaviors we want to see happen. And so that means if we're teaching a student, if we're teaching anybody, we say, if we're trying to teach a student, how to participate in class. We teach them all of the very specific steps and nuances, almost like a task analysis. You want to make sure you engage, you answer questions. We give them real deliberate things to do. And we do that for teachers when it comes to teaching students, academics for the most part, but we don't really break down what it means to collaborate with families. We say collaborate, we say trust, but do we really ever break down those behaviors and say, okay, so if you really want to collaborate with families, what is that going to look like? What are your behaviors going to look like? And what most of us have found in our research is teachers can say, well, we reach out, they say all the right words. We want to have open communication. We want to work together. And so the research shows that teachers can say what a partnership should look like with a family, but they're not able, so they can talk the talk, but they're not walking the walk. And that is simply because they don't really have those skill sets. They're not learning them. And if they're not learning them in their pre-service programs, what I always like to say is then they're really going off of their own experiences in life. Maybe they had classes when they grew up, but we all know most emotional intelligence isn't really taught in our schools. And a lot of collaboration has to do with working together, problem solving, and things like that. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is basically a case study where my colleague Kathleen Kaiser and I, we were invited by the State Department of Iowa for their SPDIG grant. They had a large SPDIG grant, and they wanted to do something around family professional partnerships. And so they reached out to Kathleen and I, and what we did is, so what I'll do is I'll talk to you about understanding key issues influencing family professional partnership programming. I'm going to describe what we refer to as the Goals Together for Partnership model, GTP. I'll talk about how it went about with implementing our partnership program. And then I'm going to offer next steps because this conference has been delayed a bit. And so this project happened during the pandemic. So right before the pandemic, we did all of the trainings and things like that. And then during the pandemic was the second part, the last part of our implementation. So everything changed. So there's a lot to share. So key issues influencing family school partnership programming. So as you know, I gave you all a little background about the why here. And the why is I'm all about teacher preparation. I'm very much focused on prevention. Much of my research is conflict prevention. And what I found is the best kind of conflict prevention is when we build a trusting and equitable partnership. And that's not easy to do because we have a lot of research that shows there's this massive research to practice gap. So that means, I publish articles and I say, here's what a great model looks like. This is how we want to be in the schools. You've all seen it with everything. And then you go in the schools and it doesn't look anything like what it's supposed to look like. And that's how I ended up in higher ed. I was a teacher. I learned all the great things at Syracuse. It was inclusive education. All I knew, I was raised inclusion, I like to say. So I only knew inclusion. And then graduated. I went back to teach in California, and I was where I'm originally from. And I was just completely shell-shocked. It was nothing like I had been taught in my programming, nothing like any of I had cooperative teachers. I mean, I had the best models. And this was a long time ago, and it's still not happening in our classrooms. So it's something we need to address. There's also a lot of school-centric thinking, really focused on the school and not understanding the whole child, realizing that you see a child in the school for how many hours a day and what is the rest of their life like, right? So academically, behaviorally, socially, emotionally, there's so many ways students are impacted outside of the school, but a lot of our schools have school-centric thinking. We need to have intentionality related to partnerships. And so, I loved our keynote that we just had because she talked a lot about intentionality and really making the effort and being very clear and transparent with what you're doing. And that's what we did. Because as I said, a lot of times you go into schools and they say, oh yeah, we include parents. We send out a weekly newsletter. We have back to school night. We have the Cinco de Mayo taco day, or we have the fall festival, and that's what we do, right? But if you really want a partnership in the way that we have envisioned in again, the research, families and educators communicating with each other, problem solving with each other, learning from each other about the student, it has to be intentional. It doesn't just happen. You have to really be deliberate in the actions that you're doing. And that's what we're finding. And teachers are lacking the skills for the most part to know how to be intentional, because we're not really doing it in our pre-service programs. And then access to resources is really important, right? So do we have access to resources in our schools? So for example, the issue that was brought up with the pandemic, I just wrapped up a really large grant with our neighborhood school district that was in response to the pandemic, a really large school district in Greeley, Colorado. And they have a large population of families that had no internet access. And so one of our major parts of our grant was we purchased 100 iPads with 2 years of internet, and we gave them to the families that had none of that. But we have to be intentional and have access to resources and know that we need to be deliberate for some of the families. That's why we see so many white educated parents represented at our schools. There's a lot of the ways that we try to engage families are from a very white educated standpoint, and culturally there's a lot of differences in the way we reach out to families. And so we need to be intentional. We need to have access to resources. So let's talk about the GTP model. So this was something that we really thought about hard and deliberately for. So what happened was we were reached out. So they reached out to us and they said, we really like to do something that is really school-wide. We'd like to do something around partnerships. We want to make a difference. What do you think? So we really thought about it, and we wanted to identify a model, because again, we need intentionality, and we need to be specific, and we need to have measurable behaviors that we're teaching them to do if we want them to know how to collaborate and communicate with families. So we wanted to acknowledge the school system and the family system. Right. And so in the school system, we've certainly got our school, we've got our teacher, and then we've got family members, and we've got the home. And it's really important that the child, my blinker's not working, but the student is right there in the middle. And we really needed to be deliberate with that to emphasize never losing sight of the student. And also, I should say, I'll be using family and parent interchangeably to be just representative of all the diverse family characteristics we have, but always know that whenever I talk about the family professional partnership, the student is the most important member in that partnership. So there's 5 tenets that we use to guide our model. And the first tenet, and these tenets were all based on the research that we know about what makes meaningful partnerships. So the first tenet was families, and you could tenets, principles, practices, beliefs. It was sort of, this is the foundation of our program. And then I'll talk about all of the details of it. But essentially, what we wanted to do was implement a universal parent professional partnership program throughout the school for all students, disabilities and no disabilities. There was no special or general education differentiation here. And almost like think PBIS for family professional partnerships. We want to be deliberate. What are universal actionable strategies that we can all do in our school, classroom, community, hallway, parent nights, conferences, and we'll get into that in a minute, but really being intentional as a school with these 5 tenets being the guiding forces of what you all decide to do. And we gave them a lot of autonomy of what they decided to do, and I'll talk about that in a moment, but it was families and educators treat each other as equals and advocate for one another. So we were addressing the importance of advocacy, and then we were addressing the importance of equity and having that leveling the playing field that we know happens very often in any kind of parent-educator dynamic. Also, families and educators interact in a bi-directional way. And we didn't want to say family and educators communicate, because that is a little bit too open sometimes, because what we found in a lot of the research is the communication is not bi-directional. It's one directional. It's teacher telling the parent, not inequity comes in. Families and educators know how to prevent and resolve conflicts. This is where I came in, and I was really adamant that that should be one of the tenets, because, you know, I'm a big believer of addressing the elephant in the room, right? Saying the thing that nobody wants to say, but it's there. And what people like to do is pretend that conflict's not going to happen. And so what I wanted to do in this training was normalize for these educators, conflict's okay, and defining what it is. You know, some people, the word conflict is like, oh my gosh, it's literally just having incompatible goals and ideas and beliefs from one another. And we just need to work through it, but really normalizing that and not making it sound so scary. Because a lot of people do go, oh no, we don't have conflicts, but acknowledge that it's likely, may or may not happen, but if it does, how are you going to handle it? And then families and educators recognize and build on each other's strengths, acknowledging each person, member at any meeting, any interaction between the family and educator. There are multiple experts in the room, and the family being an expert in their child and knowing their child, their family, their community, their needs, all of those pieces. And then finally, and these are not in any order of importance, by the way, families and educators trust each other. That, you know, I guess if there was an order, I would put that first, but because I feel like trust is foundational. Trust is where, you know, I study conflict, and when I talk with families and I talk with educators, what went wrong, what's going on, the number one word I always hear is trust, and I also hear communication. So it was really important that we teach them don't just use the word trust. What does trust look like? How do we interact with each other in a trusting way? And again, knowing that trust can be broken, we've got that other one up ahead that says we can prevent and resolve conflicts. So acknowledging trust is important to build and maintain and restore when you need it. So these were the 5 principles and beliefs that we basically built into the model, which meant we worked with 3 school districts. So we infused these tenets within all cultural aspects of a school in which families and educators interact to improve student engagement. So what that meant is, and I'll go over it in a moment, we worked with 3 schools, 3 separate schools. And what we did is we established leadership teams, and I'll go into that. And we said to them, these are the 5 tenets. We want to see these tenets involved in all of the major activities and areas in your school, but we wanted to give them the autonomy, knowing that they know their school culture and thinking, you know, you can't walk in with like partner with families in a box. You know, here's how you do it. You can't do that. But a little like spoiler alert, that's what they really wanted and need. That's the next work we have moving forward. Yeah. Wait, I need to take this to you, right? For the question? Okay.
So could you say a little bit about what you include in cultural aspects of a school? So, you know, I mean, what did you mean when you say cultural aspects of a school?
Really good question. And we had them define that. So if you're familiar at all with positive behavior intervention supports, the triangle, right? So my background's in behavior, and PBIS has a phenomenal systems model. So we utilized a lot of what they did. So, you know, in this PBIS model, it sometimes helps to make a comparison because this was very different for many people. And a lot of schools are like, what? But in the PBIS model, you would say to the school, come up with your school rules or your guiding principles. You know, it would be like roar, respect, you know, others, own your behavior, attitude that's positive, responsibility, roar. I know that from my kids' elementary school. They did a good job getting the parents to learn it. So when you have that, the school's then tasked with teaching the teachers, where are the important parts that kids learn the roar? Is it in the hallway? Is it school assemblies? Is it during class activities? So when we say the cultural aspects, we wanted to be very respectful, knowing that coming into schools, working with educators, and there were parents involved in this too, by the way, but working with anyone, we know that we have to build that trust and let them create so there's more accountability and ownership within them. If I go in, I always like to use Super Nanny as a non-example. If you've ever watched that show, she goes in, she does the observation, she writes up this behavior plan, and then she just delivers it to the family. And I don't even know if that show's on anymore, and she goes, here's what we're going to do, blah, blah, blah. And I remember watching it once, and the parents' eyes are glazed over and they're like, I can't do that. One of the parents has like 3 days off, like every 5 months, and was like, I'm not going to do that on my day off. But there's no interaction. They don't give them the opportunity to make it. We wanted to do that for these schools. So we wanted them to tell us. We asked them, where are the really important opportunities where you think families and educators can engage with each other? So is it during parent-teacher conferences? Is it during back to school night? Is it during do you want to create some kind of parent information night? Do you want to create a parent panel? So what cultural aspects do you find to be valuable in your school that you can embed this? So you make it work for you, right? So that's like what we would do to a parent, to say, hey, here's what I'm seeing with the behavior. Here's some things I'm thinking about. What do you think? What is this doable in your house? I mean, would that be workable? And so we really wanted to give them a lot of autonomy and ownership, knowing that teachers are tired of having people come in and change it again, And so and also another thing that was really important for us with this is that it was important that we say, and this is an important thing when it comes to preparing and training teachers, that we say, this isn't a fad. This isn't something going away. This isn't a new program. This is a way of being. This is you extending your skill set as an educator to really know how to work with and partner with families. And so that's where we really wanted them to make it meaningful in their context. So what we did was very intentional based on research. We know from research that teachers and family members have access to current partnership research and to learning opportunities that enable them to grow in their family school partnership knowledge and skills. We know, this is from research, we know that teachers and families believe that partnerships are important, and they actively work to improve their partnerships in an intentional and reflective way when they can. These are all, and teachers and families have access to the necessary partnership-related resources and supports within their system. When they have it, they can do this. So what we wanted to say is this is possible. This doesn't involve money at all. This is your behavior. We're teaching you how to communicate with families. You don't need to get any grants. You don't need to buy anything special. This is literally teaching you behaviors so you can partner with them. So here's what our implementation model looked like. So we had a leadership team. We called it a GTP leadership team. So again, similar to PBIS framework, if you've ever been at a PBIS school, or you know that a lot of times Colorado was really big in PBIS years ago. I feel like we need to get better at it again. But what they did across the state was every district or every school actually would have a team, their PBIS team. And what they would do is they would get all of the training, and then they would deliver the training and the technical assistance to all of their teachers and staff. We wanted to do a similar model. Again, train the trainer. So this wasn't us coming in. We didn't want this to be something where when we go, it's gone. We wanted this all about really system changes. And so what we did was each leadership team had one principal, 2 teachers, and 2 family members. We had one special education teacher, one general education teacher, one parent who had a child on an IEP, and one parent who did not have a child on an IEP. We also were very deliberate, and we said, we do not want your most challenging families, and we do not want your best friend families. We don't want the parents that are constantly in your school volunteering and showing up every day, and we don't want the parents that you are really scared of and might not be able to collaborate with, and there might be some underlying issues that might get in the way of the work that we wanted to do. So we wanted to really identify some of your more average families that maybe aren't there as much or aren't there too little, and see what we could do with that. So that's what we did for each school. The leadership team had very specific responsibilities. So the first thing is Kathleen and I put together an online module training series with foundational concepts. So, going to that keynote this morning, you can't just come for 30 minutes and learn about it and walk away. And that's what we do. We go, okay, here's how you partner with families. And I'm guilty of it because that's the only time I get. I'll do it. Whatever time you give me, I will 30 minutes, I will teach you all about partnering with families, but it needs to be more. So we did these online modules and it walked them through, gave them really the research about, first we started with foundations. Why partner with families? What's the research about it? Showing them the value in it and the meaningful outcome with it. Then there was a 1.5-day summit that it was like an opportunity for the school teams to come together. They all came. Kathleen and I were there and we trained and practiced, coached, gave them time to plan as a team, to basically taught them the GTP model that they had already learned the tenets. And then we basically were talking about now, how can you embed these tenets? What are those cultural parts of your school that you think are meaningful, that would be a good opportunity for this? So that's the work that we had them do. We had them identify implementation team members, which I'll describe in a moment. We had them develop an implementation and an evaluation plan in line with the needs and the culture of the school. So one of the things we had them do first at the summit was we had them just brain dump. What are we doing really well when it comes to partnering with families, and where are we struggling the most? And just don't think, brain dump. Just get it all out and let's look at patterns and themes. So we really wanted them to do their own kind of reflection of where they're at as a school. And then what we did was then said, okay, now identify the areas where you think you need to work on the most, and how might you go about doing that? Do you want to do a training for teachers? Do you want to do ongoing coaching for teachers? We really wanted to give them autonomy, but give them coaching along the way. So we were helping them. We had a matrix, just like you would at PBIS, and we had them develop a mission statement for how they were going to do this. We had them develop a matrix and then plan how they're going to teach it. We also had regular meetings with those teams through Zoom throughout the year. We provided technical assistance support to them. So we said, listen, if you're in your school and you guys realize hey, do you have any tips for how to include families that are more quiet, or how, then we'd say, yep, we can send you a handout. We can do a little training. We are here for your technical assistance. And then we asked them in exchange to, at least, of course, for research, we wanted to know, how did it work? Did you like it? This is something that never seen done. And we really wanted to know, is this something we could do? We'd like to develop a model that we can go into our schools and really help our educators know how to partner with families. So that's what it was all about, why we wanted to do it. The implementation team responsibilities were, so it's basically teachers that were identified in the school and families, like a teacher and a family, that were going to try out some of the things. And so the GT, they got training by their leadership team. So we did a trainer the trainer, and I'll talk about that. And then they also did a survey so we could find out how they liked it. One part of this piece of Goals Together for Partnership was goal setting with the family members. So what we wanted it to do was be very intentional. So we taught them, and this was for their implementation team, we taught the leadership team how to create goals with families, goals for their partnership, goals for their goals for how they're going to work together to support their child. So we want to meet more regularly. We want to do this kind of ongoing interactions, and then identify concrete steps to meeting those goals. We had them anticipate obstacles and find solutions, carry out the GTP tenet goal, reflect and adjust the GTP tenet goal. So I want to focus on bi-directional communication. Let's say that. So we would say, okay, create your bi-directional GTP goal. Are you going to maybe redo your, have the teachers redo their weekly communication? What's that going to look like? But what we really wanted to, again, emphasize is, what is this? This is intentional. It's very intentional. And what we're saying is, you can't just say, I'm going to collaborate with the parents. I'm going to partner with them. These teachers don't know how to do that. You don't know what you don't know. So you need to be very deliberate and say, just like you're sitting down to teach a child, you would have all these steps, not parents or child or anything like that. But, that there's actionable steps to teaching, and there's actionable steps to collaboration as well, that we just need to be a little bit more aware of. So, and then of course, always reflect and adjust. things happen and let them know things happen. You might have really good intentions for some kind of parent night. And okay, we're going to have a parent information night about bidirectional communication. We're going to do this, we're going to do that. And then like 2 people show up, so that's okay. Reflect and adjust, learn, go from there. Again, keep working within your culture. So we really wanted to emphasize that with them, but we really were working with this complex change model. And I really love this model because it shows what it takes to make systems change. And that's what we were trying to do. This is a school-wide system change. This isn't like one teacher change. We wanted a culture in that school that invited families, that welcomed families, that involved families, and was based on all 5 of those tenets. So what we knew in going in is that we needed vision. They needed vision, I should say. So we taught them this change model. We taught them all about this. You need to have your vision. So we had them write their mission. What's your mission? How are you going to stand? How are you going to express your beliefs and your actionable behaviors that include families? What are the skills that you might need? You may already have, or you might need more of, or what skills do other educators potentially in your schools need so that they can also participate in this? What incentives need to be put in place? What's some motivation, right? I mean, it's a hard time right now to be an educator. This was before the pandemic, but we've followed up a bit with them, but it takes, some incentives to motivate the families, motivate the educators to do that. Resources, what resources are needed, if any? And, and that's again where we came in, because there's so many resources on partnering, on how to partner with families. They're just not doing it. And so we just have to get to the how-to part. And then that's that action plan. It's the how-to. So I feel like our field does a good job of talking about the vision of family professional partnerships, talking about the resources, sometimes incentives, but I think we're really missing skills and action plan. And that's what I opened up with. So that's what we really wanted to emphasize a lot. And that's when you get change. But when you're missing a vision, you have confusion. When you're missing skills, you've got anxiety. When you're missing incentives, you're going to have that resistance. If you're missing your resources, it's going to be frustrating. And if you don't have an action plan, you're going to have false starts. You're not going to follow through. And that's dangerous. That's dangerous with any kind of school-wide change, because when you say you're going to do a school-wide change, you need to be very deliberate in how you're going to do it. Otherwise, if it falls to the crack, it loses its essence, its belief system, the trust in it. And people are like, oh, it's not going to work. We're not doing that. And again, they kind of think this is like parent partnership in a box, and it's not. So we really wanted to emphasize that. So again, it was train the trainer model, which meant the leadership team all learned the learning modules. They had action planning materials. As I said, it was, doing their matrix. And I have a lot of resources. If any of you are interested in some of those, I'm happy to send them to you. We also had parent-teacher conference materials, and I'm going to talk a lot about that. Make sure I'm good on time. We had GTP implementation team recruitment materials. So we also provided them information to recruit. So what is GTP? How will this benefit you? Why would you want to partner with families? Why is there a benefit? These kinds of things. Templates for check-ins. We created survey templates, goal setting guidelines and templates, website partnership resources, and data collection forms. We put it all on a Google Drive, and each school had their own Google Drive of resources. So then they also were able to create some of their own and put them in there as well. Any questions so far? Yeah, hold on.
So were any of the schools that you worked in, did any of them have a significant population of parents that spoke any languages other than English? And if so, were you able to get resources in the language that families spoke?
Also really good question. And I really like your necklace too, by the way. For those who can't see her, she has a beautiful necklace on. This was in Iowa. So no. And that is our biggest implication. We wanted to have a lot more diversity. We were working in a not really diverse community, but all 3 of them. And we were invited by the state. So we did what we could. we would love to take this to other states, where that's what we're really working on doing, is how can we modify this and take it. But that is absolutely essential. One of the schools was on a school improvement plan for having school improvement plan. And one of those was very specific to partnering with families. So, and they were a Title I, they had a lot of challenges. So that school probably benefited more from a little bit of that, but we did not have enough diversity to do that. So here's something that was really, honestly, the gem of it all that stood out, which sometimes when you do research studies or you work with schools and you do trainings, you just never know what's going to stick, right? You're like, I don't know, what are they going to like? What are they not going to like? And this is what they loved. And it was so funny because we really wanted to give them autonomy to develop the resources, to create a family partnership, like I said, a universal program across their school that embedded these 5 tenets. We wanted them to embed them in their conferences. We wanted to, parent-teacher conferences is something we knew all of them had, all of the kids had, all the families had, and we thought that's a really good, very clear opportunity for all of you to work on these 5 tenets. There's one thing we started, how can we make our parent-teacher conferences more meaningful and embed those 5 tenets? And I have 3 daughters. I've been to their parent-teacher conferences. I've never done speed dating, but I think that's what it might be like. There's no time. And so Kathleen and I are very big on parent-teacher conferences. I'm very big on any important meetings. So it's hard to get families and educators together, but we know there's certain times when they are always together. It's at an IEP meeting, it's at a parent-teacher conference. And so we wanted to grab those opportunities when we knew they were going to be together and give them direct guidance and support on how to do that. So at first we were saying, how are you going to make your conferences this way? And then Kathleen and I don't even remember how this happened, but the 2 of us sort of on a whim, honestly, at the last second, we created this conference model because what we found was they needed and wanted more deliberate steps. It wasn't enough to say, how are you going to embed these 5 tenets into the parent-teacher conference? There needed to be more intention, deliberate, actionable steps that we could provide them. So we created this template. And what we did was, I'll read you some of it. We talked about we called it our first conference of the year conference tool. And what we used with this, what we said about it is, listen, the very beginning of the year, I know it's a lot of work. I know it's a lot of time. It's not a lot of work, but it can be time consuming. But when are you going to meet with the families? Most teachers check in, most schools have some kind of thing. How can you use that first opportunity to start that partnership for the rest of the year? And how can you create it so that it's more like a relationship and a partnership than I'm just going to deliver that one-way communication to you. So we wanted to give them tools to make it a bi-directional conference, which, as I said, is not what most are like. So we talked to them about like a pre-conference reflection, getting to know each other. So we said for families and for teachers, we did it for both families and educators. For families, think about what you want your child's teacher to know about your family. Be prepared to share briefly. For teachers, think about what you want your students' families to know about you. Again, be prepared to share briefly. So just a little information there. And then what we added was something that totally threw off some of the teachers. Really interesting. We had them share their hopes and dreams. So we wanted to make it personal. We wanted to get this in order to establish trust. There's a certain point of vulnerability, of honesty, of openness, and of getting to know each other. And I mean, to expect that we have stories. I mean, my 3 daughters, I have stories, and I'm not just going to share them with some person I just met who's not really making me feel like they want to know from me, but asking me, what are my hopes and dreams for my child this year? That's so powerful. And also asking the teachers, what are your hopes and dreams for that student this year, and sharing that. And that also creates a sense of understanding. And as I say, with conflict, my favorite definition is this incompatible goals and expectations. And so a lot of times we don't share what our expectations are in our head with each other, but then we expect the other one to know what it is, right? So if I'm an educator and I have hope and dream for this student, I want the parent to know what I'm going to be working on. And also I want the parent to be able to share with me those explicit things too, be transparent so I understand what they're working on. Because, I remember one time I did a parent training, and I don't like the word training, but everything I want to know about my kid that day and everything the teacher should know about my child that day. So there's specific things. And we talked about that because one of the parents said, I don't care. I don't want to know how my kid did academically. I really don't care. I know he's fine there. I want to know if he ate lunch with someone. I want to know if he was alone. And if we don't take the time to ask them that, we don't know that that's our goal. You're helping me get my steps in. So this is good.
I just think that this whole issue of reciprocity in relationships is so important because I actually co-direct a parent center, a family advocacy organization. And, parents are always expected to, to share things that will be helpful for the teacher, but it's so rare that this vulnerability that we ask teachers to also be vulnerable. And, if you want to establish trust, especially with families that have no reason to trust the system, if you want parents to trust you, then you have to be willing to be vulnerable and share something of yourself so that parents then feel safer to be able to be vulnerable with you. And so I think this is really, really critical. And I just want to recommend, there's a fabulous book that was written by Dr. Beth Harry on using cultural reciprocity with families, which I think is okay. So it's just so important. Yes. Oh my God.
Yeah. The Beth Harry one, but then there's another one, Ishimaru, Equitable Collaboration. Love that book. Really good resources. I love what you're saying. That's what we were trying to say. There's a lot of, not controversy, but there's a lot of back and forth in our field of like, do we call it family school partnership? Do we call it family professional partnership? Do we call it, teacher educator partnership, or do we call it relationship? And, in my little group, there's several of us, I'm saying partnership now, we said that, but there's a lot of my colleague, Kathleen, she really believes be one way. They should always be both ways. So that's why we really wanted to emphasize that. And yes, teachers being vulnerable is everything. And that's so powerful when teachers can, if they make a mistake, own it, or if they don't know, share that. If they're curious, be curious with them. It's allowing that openness and vulnerability. And you're not going to get there if you start off with, okay, so let's talk about Tommy and and here's what I'm going to say about him. There's not a reciprocal partnership. And we really aren't acknowledging that piece. And I think that's where the literature says when families and educators are reciprocally working together, good things happen for the student, academically, behaviorally, socially, emotionally, all of those things. When it's one-sided, it's not going to help because and sometimes it's more damaging than helpful. And we do have families with a history of maybe not even wanting to be in the classroom to meet with the teacher. Or, I like to say a lot of background, previous teachers, previous education teams have burned them, or doctors, or their own education, 100%. Yeah, I still get nervous when the principal calls me because I'm like, oh, I'm talking to the principal, but I was that kid that talked all the time and got sent to the principal's office, but it was funny. She actually started asking me like, what do I need to do to, help around here a bit? Because she knew that they weren't meeting our needs, so you gotta be open, vulnerable, and share that and get to know the families. And so then also identifying expectations for the partnership. Let's be explicit with each other about what we want and need, and most importantly, what we're expecting from one another. I mean, everyone knows when you go, and I kind of said this earlier, but if you go into a situation with an expectation, that, if I'm walking up to you, Patty, and I'm expecting that you're going to ask me about my daughters, just making that up. She always does. And you don't. And then I'm like, oh, so that might, if we don't share our expectations, we might think something, maybe she's just busy and she didn't think about it. So, being very explicit about it. So for families, we said, think about what your child's teacher can do to help you support your child in meeting the hopes and dreams that you identified for this year. And we said, tip, consider what teachers have done in the past like this that has helped your child. I'm a huge fan of asking families what works. We do a pretty good job of knowing what doesn't work, but if we find out, what do you like? How did you enjoy that? What was helpful to you in your previous times when you've worked with teachers? What kinds of things have been helpful for you? And knowing, of course, that every family is different and some families aren't going to be as open with this. And you might need to do some more of the getting to know each other first, and so, and I really do like to emphasize not like power tripping, like introduce your role as an educator, not as Dr. So-and-so, because, I've been to a lot of meetings where, I'm the behavior specialist and I'm doing this and I'm doing that. Just say what you do instead. I'm here to talk about your child's behavior and how we can support him to be successful in the school. That says so much more than I'm a board certified behavior analyst. And that just says, I know more than you and you don't, and blah, blah, blah. And that's not nice. We don't want to do that with our families. We need our families. So then we had the actual conference tool. And what I did was, no surprise if you guys know me at all, I embedded some facilitated IEP strategies that I have found are beneficial, not just for dispute resolution, but using a lot of the strategies, the meeting tools, specifically the procedural pieces, for IEP meetings in general. Just make them good. You don't have to be in conflict to use facilitated IEP tools. I really like to emphasize that. And so what we had them do is, this was part of that pre-meeting. We had meeting norms. We wanted to establish ahead of time. And, so we're going to make sure we listen carefully, we respect the views of others, we share your views willingly, we ask and welcome questions for clarification, and we honor time limits and stay on task. And honor time limits and stay on task is so important. I was presenting with another parent recently, and she shared a story that was heartbreaking. She said she was there with a family at an IEP meeting supporting them, and the mother was very clear about when she had to end the meeting. And the team said, okay, at the beginning. So you always want to establish that ahead of time. But as many IEPs can happen, they went over and they said, oh, we're just going to do this real quick. And the mother was too embarrassed to say, I have to go. And also, as parents, we feel like, what are they going to think if I leave? They're going to think I don't care. There's so many messages. She didn't say anything. The meeting ended late. She lost her job. True story. That's heartbreaking. So even though we may feel like we have more time, we don't. So never assume somebody can stay late. If you say you're going to end it at 3, end it at 3. If you're not done, let's talk about how we can follow up later. We want to respect. But even saying sometimes, are you okay with staying late? She wasn't asked, but she might have said yes out of, embarrassment. There's, I always like to say, imagine you're going to the doctor's office and there's 12 doctors in front of you. They're going to tell you how you're doing. That's so intimidating. And that's what most IEPs are like. We wanted to be careful. So before the conference, these were recommendations for the teachers. So we said, offer a flexible conference schedule, prepare ahead of time, send informative and personal invitations. Don't make it generic. And they did a really good job of that. We said, send pre-conference reflection ahead of time. So that was thinking, we wanted them to think ahead of time, what are your hopes and dreams? That's like, ask me what my hopes and dreams are for my kids today. It might be different tomorrow, but give me some time to think on it for sure. We want to say, arrange for an interpreter if needed. And we talk to them about the importance of utilizing an interpreter, that they are a support for the family. But they are not the person you talk to, right? You allow time so there's a lot of real specific teaching that we provided these teachers. When there is an interpreter present, allow them to share, talk directly to the parent, after they've interpreted, wait, let the parent hear it, understand it, before you just move on, because I see a lot of that too, which is not really helpful. Arrange to hold the conference in a comfortable meeting room with adult-sized chairs outside of the classroom, if available, because I mean, we've all sat in those little chairs and that's really embarrassing and not everyone wants to do that. This one is huge. Greet the parents at the door and enter the room together. So we say this for IEP meetings as well. I've heard a lot of parents say, there's nothing worse than walking into a meeting and everyone's talking and laughing and they're all like educator besties and then everyone stops. It's like you're in middle school all over again. You know, you're like, oh God, what am I wearing something? What's wrong? And then we said during the conference, if possible, have tissues, water, snacks, pens, paper available. Be aware of your body language, sit side by side, share real stories, listen to the stories. There are gems in family stories. And it's one of my hard thing when I hear about families sharing with me that they're not listened to, that they get cut off when they're sharing stories, because stories tell you a lot about that child. They tell you a lot about that family. They tell you what the child likes, what the child doesn't like. Listen to the story. It's very informative and helpful. And listen, don't listen to respond. Listen. I like to say the same letters in listen are in silent. Yes, no, you're good. Hold on.
I think this point is also really, really important about listening to family stories and it's particularly important for cultures where stories are the underlying ways in which people, express their beliefs and their hopes and dreams. And I think that you cannot underestimate the power of stories. And I also think one of the things that's really powerful about stories is that sometimes people can tell you things in stories that they don't feel safe or comfortable telling you explicitly.
Also, really good point. If you want to come up here with me, I don't mind that at all. You got an award, so you've got a lot to say, but totally true. All of that. Absolutely. There's so much in the stories, and not hearing them is when we really miss the lesson. And listening to the stories helps build that trust. It creates a safe space sometimes for us to share our stories, and listen to families. When they tell you something, listen, pay attention. I'll use my personal story as an example because I'm okay, even though it's live, but my ex-husband is not supposed to be in contact with any of my kids whatsoever. And I have been very clear with my children's school. And yet every year they copy him in a welcome to the school email, or they send a message home about something they did and he's copied in it and there's exclamation marks on their attendance and everything. And every time I reach out, and here I am, I'm educated. I know the system. I'm emailing, I'm communicating, I'm doing all the right things, and they're not respecting my story. And that's really not okay. And so it's those kinds of things that we need to pay attention to. And so really taking the time to do that, avoiding jargons, acronyms, end with an affirming summary, include positive information about the student, make a copy of the notes from the meeting to share with the family. And then after the conference, we had after the conference as well. So before, during, and after, I really like to emphasize that it's not the meeting, it's the before, the during, and the after. And I do it with the IEP as well. It's a process. It's not a day. It's not a 5-minute period. So how are we going to build trust before the meeting? How are we going to build trust during the meeting? And how are we going to maintain trust and potentially restore it if need be? And so one of the things you can't see, but after the conference, is also taking the time to talk about how we're going to communicate in the future, and also taking the time to say, if there's an issue that you want to discuss, something happens, you're concerned or you have a question, because it's going to probably happen. And if it doesn't, great. But if it does, we have a plan. How would you like to communicate? How would you like me to communicate with you? Would you like me to call you? Would you like me to email you? Would you like a meeting? Because then we're kind of in advance addressing something that may potentially break our trust. Because what happens is we don't really have those we think everything's going to be happy-go-lucky. And we're like, yay, well, here's the information. We'll see you later. And then something happens to Johnny. And then we just send Johnny's mom an email, or dad or parents or whatever, family. And then they're like, what? Like nothing, So ahead of time, hey, if something happens, how should we communicate? And there should be regular communication, but then you're not surprised. Oh yeah. And then you start, listen, I remember we talked at the beginning and you said you'd really like for me to talk to you this way. Here's what's happening. Let's connect. How can we work on this? So you're really establishing your expectations as a partnership relationship at the beginning. So here's what they thought of it. Okay, during the training, I have to say this because this isn't here. One of the things we did was we called it the Jack and the Fishbowl story, and it comes out of a book. I cannot remember which book it is, but it's basically a case story of a student and teachers and family members and how they react to a certain incident where Jack breaks his fishbowl. And it was this kind of little activity that we put together. But when we did the focus groups and the interviews and we asked them, they all held on to Jack and the Fishbowl because we provided them a context to discuss amongst each other about how to address the student, the family, the administrator, the issue at hand. What I'm saying is we realized in our research of doing this that we needed to be even more explicit and more intentional in how we worked with our teachers, because what they liked the most was the conference planning tool. It was the most prescribed, kind of put together, here's how actionable steps of what we do. So this is where I get a little bit on my soapbox about how we really have to continue to provide really direct resources to educators so they know what questions to ask, how to respond, and that we diversify it for different families. Hearing their stories, another point to that, me as a behavior analyst, I'm very much, my applied behavior analysis program that I run is we got a grant called Culturally Responsive Applied Behavior Analysis. And it's all about teaching our future behavior analysts to understand the nuances and the cultural relationships that happen with behavior. And you may think this is a behavior problem, but that might not be a behavior problem for that family. And it may be culturally, and I like to say every family has its own culture. So I remember my middle daughter had a behavior problem in school. And the fourth grade teacher met with me within the first week. And he said, I think she has ADHD. I think you need to put her on medication. And that's all, right? And then he said, by the way, I'm 12 years shy of a medical degree, which I thought was not funny. We all are. But, it felt like this, ice bucket challenge. I froze. The educator in me was mom. I went to mom and I was like, oh my gosh, like what's happening? What am I missing? This and that. And I forgot the questions to ask. I totally forgot. I'm a board certified behavior analyst and I have a PhD in education. I'm a licensed general and special ed teacher. And I did not know what to ask. I froze. And eventually when so again, I really related to all of our keynotes. When I got in the car, I remember crying and thinking, oh my God, what about all the other parents that, like, I know this is wrong in my heart, but how many parents don't know that and are running off to get their kids on a med or what? I mean, and then even was like, you should give her coffee. That's an alternative. I'm like, who are you? And so of course, then I started asking the big questions and I was like, okay, well, I gathered my stuff together and then I met again. I said, what exactly are these behaviors that you're saying she's, when you say ADHD, what is she doing? Give me some observable, measurable behaviors. Well, she's calling out in class. Okay. So my next question is a behavior analysis. Well, are you responding to her? Oh, at first you said she's calling out and I'm like, what do you mean? Is she like heckling you? Is she like, boo, get down, teacher, or is she like answering questions? It's like, she's answering questions. She's not raising her hand. She's answering questions. Okay, give me some more information. Anyway, after meeting, there was some other stuff, wandering and stuff, but a really big issue with him was the fact that she was talking out loud without raising her hand. He was responding to her every once in a while. So he was reinforcing her, which is not good. But I said, let me tell you about my family culture. I am a talker. That's what I do. And I have 3 daughters. And there is never a quiet moment at the dinner table or anywhere. And it was so interesting because one of the teachers there, he said, I never thought of that. I have 3 boys and everyone just shoves their food in their face and nobody talks. And I said, well, we do. And I encourage my girls to ask thoughtful questions. And I don't want them to wait for me to tell them it's okay to talk. That's part of my culture in my family. And I want my girls to be involved and do that. I don't, because some people might say, you know, you wait to be called on and that kind of thing. I said, so have you been very explicit with her about raising the hand and really reinforcing her? No. So that's an example, a small example of the behavior that we might misinterpret. If we don't hear the stories, we don't know what's happening. So we asked them these questions, basically, because I don't want to run out of time. This ends at 11:30. Oh, perfect. 11:45. Okay. So we wanted to ask them, what did they like? So, you know, how did they like this training? How did they like this implementation? How did it go? And remember, we started training them before the pandemic and then during the pandemic. So I think we did our first training with them in like August of 2019. Right. And then March 2020 was the shutdown. And so we were still working with them in March and May, all the way to May. We interviewed them. We got artifacts, anything they created, we wanted to put together. So we wanted to see how did they make this their unique thing. And so here's some of your numbers. So we had Spruce. So you can see the numbers are pretty low, but one of our suburban Title, well, they were all Title I's. But we had Spruce, that was a suburban. We had Willow, which was a rural school. And then we had an urban school. The majority were white students, but Spruce had 45% white students, 23% Latinx, 22% Black African-American. So it was a little bit, but not much. So they did some things, but it wasn't a big enough population. And all of the teachers were for the most part female and white. And so the implementation team, we have the family member characteristics. So this was our leadership team and our implementation team. We wanted to know, you know, what information they had, these are just their demographics. That's not really as informative. Really, we didn't have the diverse. I would love to try this with a more diverse school, knowing there's all sorts of different, like, again, we go in with the tenets. These are our 5 principles, but how can we make those 5 principles a part of that school culture with the culture that they've got? What the groups of, what are the families, what are the different families represented? What are some of the family needs? Again, it was that a beginning part of what's working well, what's not working well, and what do you need to know? And also we've figured out what they don't know, right? And so that was some of that. So we asked them how often they communicate with their teacher. And it was, the majority said weekly or more. But most of it was one direction. And of all the tenets that they talked about the most, it was the bidirectional communication. That one really hit for them. So if I have one thing to walk away with, when we encourage communication, instead of saying families and educators need to communicate with each other, say they need to have bidirectional communication. We need to be very specific. If we just say communicate, I'm communicating, but I'm not really. So we really need to be explicit with that. And they really held on to that, which I really liked. And then we asked them how long they had been in the school. A majority of them were within the first 5 years. And this is one of the greatest challenges, is that we do this training, we do this work, and then they leave. And so this is why what we really wanted to do was make it so it wasn't dependent on me and Kathleen, but it was dependent on the school team putting it together. Because if people leave, hopefully some of that leadership team, or if they've made it more of a sustainable practice that it's embedded within that school's culture, mission, et cetera, then which one of the schools really, really did. So we'll talk about that. We talked about this. We asked the leadership team and the implementation teachers, did they get a lot of teacher preparation for partnership? And it looks like the majority of them said adequately, but those numbers aren't really So most people feel like it's adequate, but not complete. What I found is when it comes to partnering with families, a lot of educators don't really, I really am a fond person of the saying, they don't know what they don't know. So a lot of times they think they know. Like I said, there's been research that says teachers can say the right words, but they don't do the actionable work. They don't walk the walk because they don't know how to. So don't know what that looked like. So here's how it looked across all 3 schools, how they implemented it. And one of the things that we're doing, we have a manuscript out on the working on out. There's so many moving parts to this, so it's hard to tell the whole story. But Spruce is the one that embedded it within their school improvement plan. So this was the school that, if I'm going to be completely honest, probably shouldn't have been chosen. We didn't choose the schools, but probably shouldn't have been chosen because they were on an improvement plan and they had a lot of areas they needed to make up. And so it was almost like they were in a real big hole trying to get out. And I feel like when this is really new work, right? So we don't really want to pick the hardest schools yet, because we kind of want to see, how does this even work with some schools that are doing okay, but not like the ones that have a lot of needs. They were really focused on their improvement plan and putting it together that I'm not sure how much they implemented it. So they understood the writing it out and the doing that, but the implementation was a little bit off. But the teachers met collaboratively and they prepared a plan to share with parents. And then they met with the parent partners. And then they had follow-up steps for mid-year conferences, but they canceled due to COVID-19. So they were one of the schools that just kind of was like, well, we're in COVID. We can't do anything right now, which hurt. But what was interesting was when we did the final interviews, we asked, so did this prepare you at all for COVID? And we had no idea this was going to happen. And the communication, and a lot of them said, well, because we had that beginning meeting, we had a relationship and we were able to connect. So some of them were able to directly say in some of the other schools that this did help them prepare for COVID, what happened with the distance communication. But some of them didn't outright say it, but they described it and you could see that there was benefit to it. So I do think, we didn't measure that entirely. This was qualitative research. So, we did some survey stuff, but there's a lot more digging that needs to be done. But I would like to think that having this conversation at the beginning of the year before the pandemic shuts down to say, what are your hopes and dreams? I want to get to know you. Let's really communicate. And then having this shutdown I would hope would bring a little bit more closeness than if you just had your speed dating parent teacher conference like most schools do. The Willow School went all in. They were hyped. When we were doing this summit, they were like creating chants. They made t-shirts. They created this entire PTA, got the PTA involved, and then they called it You Matter. And they wrote letters. So when they wrote that, we said, write a personal letter introducing. So I have all these examples. It was too much to put on here, but they said, hey, welcome to the school. We really want you here. We want to learn about your student. We want to learn this. We want, this is who I am. And then it ended with You Matter. And they had kids make little videos and they showed it. And then what I loved about how they did, they really, like I said, the parent teacher conference resonated with them. So they all thought that's something I can grab onto and immediately use with the GTP. And so what they did was they realized that they were doing their parent teacher conferences all wrong. The front side was the grades. The back side was sort of the qualitative remarks about the student where there was some family questioning kind of thing. And they were like, whoa, we need to do it the opposite. We should not. So they switched the order of it so that the grades would be, and they said, we don't even think we should talk about grades or things. We feel like if they have it, they can see it and they can ask questions. We should just talk with them more and get to know them more. So they really, and the parents, we found having parents on this leadership team was everything. So absolutely. I really want to emphasize, if you're going to try and do any kind of school improvement around family professionals, you got to have family members there, and you got to have all different family members representing. You got to have fathers there, not just moms. I've done some research on that. We exclude fathers a lot, siblings, partners, whatever. We need to have all these important people there. So You Matter, they really went all in, and they continue to have these meaningful conversations, and they wanted to take it to the district. So a couple of these, Willow, I think was one, and I think Pine, they shared it with some of their, I think their district administrators, and they wanted to roll this out district wide. But Kathleen and I are like, whoa, 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 not yet. Like, we have to do some more stuff, because you know what happens if you push it out and it's not ready. So we were like, we need to do a little bit more. So we're making it a little bit more manageable right now. And we're holding on to the parent teacher conference. And I'll talk about that in a moment. And then Pine embedded it within their tiered instructional framework. So they were already doing tiered work at their school. They had like they already had a team that was doing tiered work from a social, emotional, behavioral standpoint. And so they embedded it. They said, oh my gosh, this is great. We need to have conversations with families when we're talking about their behavior and their emotion. We need to have these kinds of conversations that are relationship builders. And so they did that. They also created this really cool visual explaining the 5 tenets for the school community. And so it was a video. I wish I could show it, but what they did was, you know, when you see the people drawing and they do like a little, and it comes together with some kind of picture. So that's what they did. They did like strong arms, and that was, you know, something. And then, I don't know, something was trust, but they created this visual, and that's how they explained it. And then they put it on bookmarks, and they gave it to the whole school. They gave it to the families, gave it to the teachers and everybody. And then they utilized the GTB conference materials for all of their fall conferences. So some schools just did it with their implementation team, but they did it with the entire school. And also, I should say, each one of these schools, their implementation team, their leadership team had a meeting, some of them had several meetings with their teachers to talk about this, to say, this is what GTP is, this is what we're doing, this is why you matter, and to go forward. So they really did take a lot of ownership in that. But what we found the most with all of them, definitely with Willow and Pine, was that conference. They loved the conference. They loved having the conference tool. They loved knowing what questions to ask, and they loved the idea of having that relationship building. They also said it was kind of weird, which is what they said at first when we trained them, we taught, and some of them really held on to the word hopes and dreams. And they said, well, I don't know, is that going to sound too hokey? Is that, you know, they thought it was a little bit too weird, different, which Kathleen and I were like, wow, we really don't have relationship language in our schools at all. And that was a big eye opener. We need to use more relationship language, because the teachers were like, well, can we, you know, that sounds kind of odd to say, what are your hopes and dreams? It's a little too kumbaya. We heard that, and we're like, well, it may feel that way. It's different because it's relationship-based language, and we don't usually do that. So what we found was their perceptions with the online modules were mixed, as most educators have with online training. We did our best to keep them under 20 minutes. I'm a huge believer that I love the TED Talks model, like 20 minutes, give some stories, make it you know, relatable and all of that. And so we really did our best to do that. But ultimately, they had a hard time with the fact that they had a lot of modules to go through and a workbook that accompanied it. So it wasn't just to sit and get, it was some recorded modules that I worked on with Kathleen. And then we created a workbook that went along with it. And so there were points in the video where we would say, okay, pause. And so like one entire module was on trust building. And so I would say, okay, and why build partnerships? Pause. Think about partnerships in your past that have been meaningful. What made that work? So really self-reflective activities during these modules. So they said it was necessary background information. It was efficient. It was user-friendly. They also said it was lengthy. It was repetitive. Yes, it's going to be repetitive. We have to be repetitive, because I feel like the more repetitive we are with educators, the more it's going to stick. And we're super repetitive in behavior. So I thought, great, I'll say it over and over again, because we really need to learn that. It was time consuming and could be improved with more vignettes and visuals. So again, what we found is that when we're doing trainings with educators about partnering with families, they like to have case studies they can hold on to, something they can talk about, and something that's not their personal one. Because I think when it's up, and I think there's absolutely room to talk amongst each other about sort of problem solving a situation, but not until you've kind of learned the basic foundational skills first with less emotion involved. So I feel like when we ask people to reflect on family professional partnerships we've had in the past that have been challenging or successful, we get emotional sometimes. And sometimes we lose sight of sort of how we should dissect the case study and get into it. So giving them a case study that they could all look at, like Jack in the Fishbowl, and talk about. They also really liked the symposium because they said it gave them time. It gave them time to plan. I mean, the whole You Matter thing happened there. Like I said, they were like acting it out. They were writing the letters. They needed the time with each other. And that is something we really know when it comes to system-wide changes in schools. We just we're not giving the right amount of time. It cannot be, to today's speaker, it cannot be 30 minutes on diversity or equity. Like, it's got to be ongoing. We've got to be more deliberate with this. So we need to give them time to collaborate and implement if they're going to be asked to do that. The following aspects were not as utilized. So the goal setting process, they didn't like setting that. They had a hard time with the goal setting process, particularly the special education teachers and some of that general, because they thought it too much related to the goal of a student with a disability. The word goal totally threw them off. And so what we realized is we need to just use different language, but also it was sort of a level of the relationship that they weren't ready yet for. And then TA support from us, we were like, we're here. What do you need? What do you need? And they really didn't tell us what they needed. We would talk to them sometimes and we say, okay, do you want this? And again, part of that message for us was, you don't know what you don't know. And sometimes you don't know what you need. So we had to listen to their stories and know a little bit more about that. So that was a learning opportunity for us. And then project management tools. There were a lot of tools we created for them. Some of them used it more than others, but that was okay. Again, we wanted them to take what they could and implement it. The more they adopt it and make it their own, the more likely it's going to be sustainable change in their school. And then again, it happened during the 2019-2020 year. The pandemic happened. So building closed, online instruction started March 2020, and then they were like, oh my gosh, help. So that also totally affected it too. So here's what their perceptions were, which I really liked the outcome of what we found. They said it improves partnerships. They said it leads to intentionality. They use those words, not us, which I thought was really great, because what they meant was it's very intentional. They realized that it needs to be done. And that alone was like, oh my goodness, they get it. So that was really great. They also said it leads to a mindset change. And so the mindset change, when they talked about it, they really were talking about the fact that it was there was relationship language during the parent-teacher conference, which there usually isn't at all. And so that they refer to as a mindset change, that I need to look at this partnership in my mind in a different way than I've done in the past. So for them to use that language and share that with us, it was all three of the schools were very clear. It was so much, when we do qualitative research, you want saturation, everyone's saying the same things and doing the same things, and you've got themes. And it was exactly that. It was too much. We were just saying, make it more relationship based. So having some of the school educators describe it as such a different approach was really like eye-opening, and thinking, wow, we need to do more with that. Teacher and family buy-in and time. Time's always going to be there, right? So key factors that we identified was really important. You need to have a strong leader or a leadership team. And it's important that your leader isn't the kind that does it all. You want a leader, a good leader, someone who delegates, who shares responsibilities with others, so that it's not sort of like a team with one person doing it all. And you really want to we had everyone on that team for a reason. We wanted family voice. We wanted educator voice. Intentional and frequent communication with families is important. Bidirectional interactions are necessary for meaningful partnerships, and stronger relationships are an outcome when partnerships focus on student-family success. So we were pretty happy with the outcome and some of the key thoughts we found. So what are the next steps? So we've got to keep doing this work. We realized, I mean, the pandemic kind of really shook it up a bit, but also we were in a very, like I said, very different community. And we want to try this with other ones. But what we decided was it was really big. This was almost too big for some schools at this point. What we're working on now is we're really wanting to focus in on the conference teaching tool. So we've kind of recreated a conference planning tool for what we call it the better meeting model, building equitable, trusting relationships. And what we want to do is it's going to be the better first meeting model. So it doesn't matter what it doesn't need to be a child on IP or not. It just is, you're an educator, you have a student in your class, it's the beginning of the year. What's your first meeting going to look like? Are you going to have relationship language and get to know each other? So we know that we need more diversity to try this. We need more initiatives and activities and level of autonomy for new initiatives. Supplemental training is needed. We'd love to have more participatory action research principles. So participatory action, meaning we have the families and the teachers doing all the work with us, doing the research with us. We see a lot of research where it's the teacher doing or the researcher doing to everyone, but I need to hear their voices. So we want families involved asking questions with us. I don't know all the questions to ask, the families do too. So working together, implementing ongoing evaluation, getting more kind of deliverables, having more equity and leadership team, because we did have one team that one of the leaders ended up doing a lot of the work for the rest of the team. And what happened as a result of that was during one of the interviews, I was speaking with one of the educators and I was like, well, have you used this resource? She's like, I don't know how to access it. This leader does it for us. And so it was like, we need more of that shared responsibility if we really want to make this kind of team effort work happen. Okay, so I've got a little time to answer more questions. But a little bit more about the building equitable, trusting relationships conference tool. It's really the idea that we want to provide teachers with something to use. We're realizing teachers need to be provided direct resources, supports, to know what questions to ask, and those kinds of things.
Well, I think it makes a lot of sense to focus in on the parent-teacher conference. And one reason is that just in any kind of relationship, having that face-to-face relationship, starting with that face-to-face and building that trust in that situation makes it much easier to then be able to have good bidirectional communication and positive relationships and trust for further opportunities. And it's in any kind of relationship building, it's the first thing that really sets the stage for the rest of it. So I think that makes a lot of sense. The other thing that I worry about, or the thing that I worry about here, is that it sounds like some of the people in the schools did see this as kind of an add-on as opposed to a redo. Something, because really, in order for this to be effective, it has to be people thinking about, we're going to redo the way we do the things we already have to do. And if you think about redoing how you do the things you already have to do, you don't see it as an add-on. You see about a reset. And then it doesn't seem like so much of a burden or time consuming. So anyway.
Really, really good point. No, I absolutely agree with that. And that's why we for the parent teacher conference to start out with, where there's not a lot of research out on parent teacher conferences, but it's such an important opportunity. And I mean, we know about the IEP meetings. So it, like you said, and that's what I really like to remind people when I do any of these trainings is we're humans, we're people, we have beliefs, we have feelings, we have values, we have biases, we have all of these things that we bring in these invisible glasses that we wear every day. And if we're not explicit in our relationship building, we're not really getting to know each other. And then those communications we don't feel safe. And for those families who really, it is challenging to partner with educators because of maybe their past experiences or whatever, it does really help soften that. And yes, you're right. That's one big thing we learned. It can't feel like an add-on. And I think that's why we held on to the parent teacher conference the most, where we pulled it out, because so two of the schools, so that's where they grabbed it. They were like, yes, we can shift our parent teacher conference. And that's a redo, not an add-on. So two of those got it. The school that you're feeling with that, they were the improvement plan school. They had a lot of things thrown at them, but it did feel like an add-on with these tenants, and you have to make this matrix. And they were just like, what do I do? So I agree. I think scale back, start with something they all do, create that foundation, and then see where it leads your school. But if we start with a parent teacher conference, I think we're going to be doing really well, because that is that opportunity to engage. And one thing I thought was really powerful that happened in one of our interviews was, and this comes up. So it was the acknowledgement that this teacher said, this is a special education teacher on one of the leadership teams. She said, it really made me rethink a lot of things. I used to always have I realized that when I would go to the IEP, I had it all filled out before I would go to the meeting without asking the parents any questions. And then it made me realize that's not bidirectional. That's not building trust. And we didn't directly talk about the IEP. I mean, I, of course, always extended the IEP, but we really wanted, because we didn't want this to be like, this is a special education initiative. All families and educators need to work together, period. I don't care any child's need. We all have different needs. But but what she shared about that was, because then I said, tell me a little bit more about that. And she said, well, it changed everything, because I realized I was going in there and I wasn't really asking the parents or including them. Yes, love that as an aha. And I also realized that one of the reasons why I write it all in is my own insecurities, because I don't want to come across as incompetent. Right? That I'll never forget that. My whole whoa, wow, so powerful. So it makes me wonder how many of these new educators, I've been there, I remember I was a teacher. I didn't have any kids myself, but I was new and bright-eyed, and I come in and my paraprofessional had, children older than me. And it was really, really intimidating. And there's so many things we try to do to protect our competence, and come across that many times that behavior comes across as, I know more than you, I'm close to you, I'm not including you. But really, she didn't want to come across as incompetent to the parent, didn't want to include the parent. So it was a big eye opener for her. And she said, now I don't fill it in, and I just have to tell myself that's okay. They're not going to think that about me. But we do have a lot of our own insecurities as an educator too. So that's where that relationship building really helps. So yeah, there's a lot of work to be done on this. Any other questions or comments? We have 3 minutes left. Patty?
I was taking notes here, and one of the first things I noticed around family school partnership, it took me back to the IFSP. So my child was lucky enough to have early intervention before there were IFSPs. But everything in early intervention is around relationship building. So taking that into Part B, whether your child has a need for special support services or not, that's the foundation that you've got. And I went into the IEPs thinking that we always had them at home. I invited them into the house. I think my kid was in first grade before someone said, normally we have these at school. But the foundation was laid that this was a partnership. And so I like the FSP taking us back.
Yes, definitely. I love that.
Thank you for saying that. I wasn't going to say anything, but I'm a Part C person here in a very Part B world. And I appreciate your language of that your child had the benefit of having an IFSP prior. That is meaningful. It actually almost makes me cry because I think it's overlooked a lot. And early intervention is key to success of Part B as well. And so that's really cool. I appreciate you saying that. Awesome. And I am thinking this through, and every session that I've been to, they've been fantastic this week. I've really enjoyed myself here. I really tried to take the Part C approach. So I'm looking at this and it really reminds me of the work that we've done in our Part C program around our state systemic improvement plan, which is our focus to social emotional health, Idaho. And how can we, a lot of what you've done sounds like what we've done to implement our early childhood outcomes, right? And that kind of stuff. So really trying to think about how this works into Part C. So I appreciate that, but it's really cool what you did. So I just wanted to say thank you to both of you.
I just wanted to follow up because I think, one of the things that happens with families who go from early intervention into school is that F is completely obliterated. There is no family in the IEP. And that's true in terms of the special ed part of their child's life, but also in terms of parent-teacher conferences. So often the family is just missing from that whole conversation. And for parents who are in early intervention and then go to school age, it's like a complete shift in and almost an abandonment of something that they have developed, this idea of the family part, and the family being so important. So that's one of the things I really love about this approach, which is it's putting the F back, the family back into the relationship. And so anyway.
Yeah, it's the coaching. Yeah. And the coaching model is everything. It can't just be done in a workshop. And and so I'm so in agreement with that. The IFSP is, so I study mostly the IEP, and that is the thing that comes up the most, this big drop between the IFSP and the IEP of all of a sudden families going, whoa, what happened? I feel abandoned and I'm feeling disrespected and ignored, and then that starts, and then we keep going with those. So we've got to bring the F back in that. I'm a huge believer in that. One thing I'll just end on this note. I love to share whenever I do trainings with educators or anyone, I say, you will not find one research study that says families and educators working together is not a good thing. Not one study. I don't care what none of the family demographics, not one study says that. So as long as you're working on that, there's going to be good outcomes for everyone. So thank you for all the questions and comments.